Let's bring in Cliff May. He's founder and president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cliff, welcome. Good to see you again. What do you make of the applications by Finland and Sweden? Is this a good development?
Oh, I think it's a very good development. Putin has succeeded, or may be succeeding in revitalizing NATO, which, remember, at one point President Trump called obsolete. He later withdrew that. But I think there was a danger that it was becoming obsolescent. The Europeans were not putting much money into the collective defense. Their credibility wasn't good. Their readiness, their capabilities wasn't good. This is very different. And, of course, this means that NATO will I think be stronger than it otherwise would have been, and it's kind of remarkable. I mean, Sweden has not had military alliances in 200 years, and you and I remember the phrase Finlandization for a country that gives up some of its sovereignty really to the Soviet Union in exchange for peace. Finland saying, no, we want to be entirely free, independent, and sovereign, and we want to be part of NATO. So this is very important, important development for NATO, or at least it can be going forward.
I think a lot of Americans wonder, what are the interests of the United States in expanding NATO, in the sense that there are two more nations there, one of which has an 830-mile border with Russia, that we are obligating ourselves to defend. What's in it for us? What's in it for our interests?
Very important question. I would address it this way. We talk all the time about the international community. For the most part, that's a figment of our imagination. If you're talking about the United Nations, you've got China and you've got Russia on the Security Council with veto power. You've got organizations like the UN Human Rights Council, which is dominated by human rights abusers. NATO is an international community. Now, it's very important that our partners in NATO carry their own weight, increasingly going forward. We have to make the case to them that, look, we are going to be part of NATO. We're going to be the leader of NATO, but European security must be, above all, a European responsibility and interest. That's particularly true because we have the threat from Beijing, from the Communist Party, which rules China. And NATO also has to understand that China is a threat not just to us, but also to Europe. At the end of the day, here's the choice we have to make. Either we, America and other free nations, shape the world order, or we allow the world order to be shaped by China, by Russia, by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and their allies, which include Cuba and Nicaragua and Venezuela. There's no third alternative, and so NATO could be perhaps the most important international community for the free nations of the world.
All right. Now, Turkey is objecting rather loudly and publicly about the entry of Sweden and Finland. Could they scuttle this, and what does Turkey want?
Well, they could scuttle it. Look, Turkey under Erdogan, who's been in power since 2003, almost as long as Putin, he's the bad boy of NATO. It's really a great disappointment. For years, we saw Turkey as the bridge between Europe and the Middle East, between the Muslim world and the non-Muslim world. But Erdogan's become increasingly authoritarian. In terms of NATO, he has he's been very cozy at times with Russia. He bought the S-400 ground-to-air missiles. The U.S. denied him S-35 jet fighters in response because you don't want Russians learning about how to use their missiles to bring down American jets. All kinds of bad things. So,
but what's the price? What is the price? Yeah, what price does he want for granting admission to these two countries?
So there'll be some horse trading. He's particularly upset with Sweden, Why? Because he says the Swedes are too pro-Kurdish, and there are at least two Kurdish groups that he sees as terrorist groups, one the PKK in the country, the other the YPG, which is in Syria, where he is as well. So he's going to ask for certain concessions. I doubt at the end of the day he wants to be the nation that stops Sweden and blackballs them. But I think he wants something in exchange. But he's the least. Look, Turkey has the second biggest military in NATO after the U.S., but in a lot of ways, Turkey is the least reliable member of NATO, and that's a problem, and he would exacerbate that problem if he would insist on this. So this may be a case where there is a diplomatic solution, but he'll want something to say to his people. You see what I got from them? I win.
All right, briefly, Cliff, How seriously did you take the threats from the Russians if NATO expands?
Look, Putin is not an entirely rational actor in some ways, so it's very hard to predict what he will do. He doesn't like it, but he is going to. One of his war aims was to divide and maybe destroy NATO because he hates it. Now, NATO is a purely defensive alliance. NATO doesn't come into a country like the Warsaw Pact came into Hungary in 1956 during that revolution, or Czechoslovakia in '68 during the Prague Spring. It doesn't do things like that. A nation can pull out of NATO. Nations couldn't pull out of the Warsaw Pact. He knows. I mean, I don't
right.
believe he knows NATO is no threat to him, but he doesn't like NATO on his border. But he has lost. That battle is lost, and he is ending up expanding NATO by his own actions. I think it was the Prime Minister of Finland who said, "You want to know what?" Said to Putin, "You want to know why this has happened? Look in the mirror."
All right. Thanks, Cliff May. Appreciate it.